Go. A thoughtful mind, when it sees a nation's flag, sees not only the flag only, but the nation itself, and whatever may be its symbols, its insignia, he reads chiefly in the flag the government, the principles, the truth, the history which belongs to the nation that sets it forth. This quote is by Henry Ward Beecher. The colonists fought for their freedom against the British because they wanted to follow their beliefs. This is how it began. The First Continental Congress began in September 1774. The Adams cousins and 56 other delegates first met in Philadelphia. Some delegates, like John Dickinson, tried to find ways to make peace with Britain. Others, though, like Patrick Henry, said the conflict would only end in violence. The delegates told the colonists to continue to boycott British goods and arm their militias in case violence broke out. The delegates assembled a carefully worded list with 10 resolutions for the king. If king refused their demands, which he did, then the delegates would meet again in 1775. British leaders ordered troops in the colonies to prepare to seize colonial militia's weapons. The local militia members were called Minutemen because they would fight on a minute's notice. In 1775, British General Thomas Gage got orders to take the local militia's weapons in Concord. Spies told the Sons of Liberty the British are preparing to move. Paul Revere, a member of the Sons of Liberty, said, "If the British are coming by land, light one lantern, and two if by sea." On the night of April 18th, 1775, Revere and William Dawes received word that the British were crossing the Charles River to march to Concord. When they got the news, he rode through the town and yelled, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" Isaac Davis, a member of the Minutemen, heard the alarm, and his wife described the alarm. "The alarm was given early in the morning, and my husband lost no time in making ready to go to Concord with his company. He said but little that morning, ready to go to Concord with his company. He said but little that morning. He seemed serious and thoughtful, but never seemed to hesitate. He only said, 'Take good care of the children.'" In the morning of April 19th, less than 70 Minutemen met a larger force of British soldiers. The colonial commander shouted to his men, "Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have war, let it begin here." But then there was a shot fired. No one knows who fired the shot, but it is called the shot heard around the world. The fight began, and when the smoke cleared, 8 colonists were dead and 10 wounded. After the fight, the British marched to Concord. When they arrived, not many weapons were found. Some angered British set fire to the buildings. Isaac Davis said, "Will you let them burn the town down?" "No, I haven't a man who is afraid to go." The Minutemen attacked the British soldiers, or also known as the Redcoats. For the last time, this time the British suffered more than 250 casualties and 100 colonial colonists. In 1775, representatives from 12 of 13 colonies met in Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress. They decided not to break away from Britain, but organize and fund a continental army with George Washington as commander. Washington was organizing his troops while the Congress tried for peace one more time. July 5th, the delegates signed the Olive Branch Petition. War was so bad that when the king received the petition, he declined it. In May 1775, the colonists captured Fort Ticonderoga. On May 10th, the colonists sneaked up on the British during a fierce early morning rainstorm and then quickly took the fort and a large supply of weapons. After the battle at Concord, the British withdrew to Boston, where Minutemen surrounded the city. Colonial forces held Boston under siege. Colonial soldiers secured the hills. The redcoats mounted frontal assaults against the colonists. The colonial commander told his men, "Do not fire unless you see the whites of their eyes." Most of the fighting occurred at Breed's Hill. Eventually, the outnumbered colonists retreated. 1,000 British soldiers died compared to the 400 colonists. The Battle of Bunker Hill was a for moral victory for the colonists could with a moral victory for the colonists because they could withstand a British frontal assault. To drive the British from the city, colonists needed heavier artillery. Washington put Henry Knox in charge of transporting these guns over 300 miles during the winter. The British guns were no match for the well-positioned cannons. The rebels colonists have done more damage in one night than my whole army could do in months. On March 7th, Howe ordered a retreat from Boston to Canada.
Paine's common sense, which argued for breaking away from Great Britain, spread throughout 13 colonies. Within 3 months, colonists had bought around 12,000 copies. Eventually, sales throughout the colonists in Europe reached some 500,000 copies. Common Sense achieved great popularity for both its message and writing, most perhaps written by lawyers such as John Dickinson. Dickinson wrote fancily, so only wealthy can read it. Paine wrote Common Sense for wider audience. John Adams' wife wrote him, "Remember the ladies, and more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies. We are determined to formally start a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no choice or representation."
And go.
July 1776, slavery was legalized in the colonies, but revolution began to stir debates about slavery within a society that valued liberty. Some colonists believed that the principle all men are created equal should apply to everyone, regardless their race or gender. Mumbet made this argument about she successfully sued for her freedom in 1781. Massachusetts court formally established slavery in that state. 2 years later, by 1784, the rest of New England also had taken steps to end slavery.
And go.
85-year-old civilian described the battle that took place on January 3rd. The guns went off so quickly and so many together at the same time they could not be numbered. The president went down into the cellar to keep us out of the waves of the shot. There was a neighbor woman down there in the cellar with us. She was so frightened that she imagined the field was covered with blood. The Battle of Princeton was so hard fought, the Patriots successfully drove the British back. As the colonists watched the redcoats flee, Washington cheered, "It is a fine fox chase, my boys." On September 11, 1777, the British met Washington's troops at the Battle of Brandywine Creek. The Patriots suffered almost twice as many casualties as the British. Howe's hesitation offered the Patriots to recognize. October 1777, Burgoyne Patriots. James Thatcher recorded in his diary, "This event will make out one of the most brilliant pages in America's history."
The British have much greater resources than those of the colonists. The British had a well-maintained army with mostly professional soldiers. The country had what one historian called the most powerful navy in the history of the world. The colonists had no navy in the beginning of the war, only a few poorly trained militias. Despite all the disadvantages, the colonists had some advantages, like most of the civilians supported the revolution throughout the war. This meant the British faced many citizens who were mostly hostile to its presence. The British had to ship most of their weaponry across the Atlantic Ocean, therefore slowing down their war effort. The Patriots fought for a cause they believed in. Most of the British were hired mercenaries. During the war, 230,000 soldiers served in the Continental Army. Another 145,000 enlisted in local militias. Many teenagers, like 14-year-old James Forten, would fetch gunpowder for sailors in the Continental Navy. Few of the volunteers had combat experience, leaving the rest pretty helpless during the war. George Washington was having a problem of whether or not he should recruit African Americans. Many soldiers did not want the use of African Americans in the battle, so Washington issued an order that prohibited all African Americans. On November 7th, 1775, Lord Dunmore did the exact opposite of what George Washington did. Lord Dunmore issued a statement that promised that any slave who fought for the British would earn their freedom. This led thousands of slaves to the British side. This led the Continental Army to change their policy. The new policy said that any free African Americans can fight. The American Indians were a problem because although they were mostly neutral in the war, they sided with the British. The most important ally for the Redcoats was the Mohawk leader Thayendanegea, or Joseph Brant. He persuaded many Iroquois in New York to fight for the British. Many women helped the men, like some ran the farm and businesses, while the men served in the army. Other women did direct stuff like cooking, cleaning, and sewing. Some of the women were nurses, spies, or even messengers. A Massachusetts man said, "At every house, women and children are making cartridges, running bullets, baking biscuits, and at the same time animating, encouraging their husbands and sons to fight for their liberties." These women were greatly needed because the Patriot supplies were low. Because the army was short on supplies, most Patriot leaders wanted to fight a defensive war. Others wanted to attack Canada and make it the 14th colony. In September of 1775, Patriot troops attacked the British forces in St. John's, Canada. This was led by General Richard Montgomery. 2 months later, they won the town and Montreal. Shortly afterwards, the next target was Quebec. Washington was in New York during late June. Washington was in New York during late June of 1776. This is when Patriots spotted British ships approaching New York Bay. General Howley had the British force the Continental Army to abandon Long Island. Late August, Washington's troops retreated to Manhattan Island. The Patriots lost more than 1,000 people. The British lost less than 400 men. Several months later, the Redcoats drove the Patriots out of Manhattan Island.
British confident about victories in Canada and New York. Howe sent the troops to rescue Jersey in November 1776. Howe gave his troops Christmas and New Year's time to rest. Delayed planned offensive attack toward the Philadelphia. Left Jersey hands of hesitation. German Mercedes, who fought the British Washington, took advantage of the holiday break, and Howe allowed his troops to attack in the Hessians and Trustons. New Jersey might have been taken off guard. Washington's troops were the battlements in the night. Early morning in December 26 Patriots marched into Truston and attacked the Battle of Truston, less than more than 2 hours. Patriots captured 900 Hessians and had 4 casualties of their own. British General Charles Cornwallis prepared and countered attack while Washington decided to move on Princeton. Night before the battle, Washington left campfires burning while the bulk of their force sneaked out and covered the darkness of the circle. And the British 85-year-old civilian described the battle that took place on January 3rd. The guns went off so quickly that so many together that there's a number. We couldn't name the number. Describe the battle. Describe the battle we took presently. Went down in the cellar to keep out of the way of the shot. The neighbor woman was in the cellar with us. That she was so afraid that she imagined the battlefield was covered with blood. British authorities were offended. In spring 1777, British military leaders proposed an offensive campaign to cut New England off from the rest of the colonies. Their new plan needed Gentleman Johnny boycott troops in Canada to retake Fort Sultan, to then march south. Second Force marched east from Lake Ontario. Howe's troops in New York would move north, and all 3 forces would combine.
Patriot forces were very disorganized in the western frontier. A young frontiersman named George Rogers Clark stepped forward to organize these troops. When war broke out, Clark was a skilled frontiersman who knew the land because he started out by mapping the land. He proposed a plan to weaken the British support systems by attacking the places they get the resources from. Clark described the importance of attacking Kaskaskia and Cahokia like this. The remote situation of this town enables the British to furnish the different Indian nations and keep up a strict friendship with the Indians. If it was our possession, it would distress the garrison or soldiers at Detroit for provisions. It would fling the command of 2 great rivers, the Mississippi and Ohio, into our hands, which would enable us to get supplies of goods from the Spaniards and to carry on trade with the Indians. June 1778, Clark and his troops set out for the village. When they arrived in July 4th, 1778, the people of Kaskaskia surrendered without even the fire of a bullet, as did Cahokia. When they arrived there, the French town of Vincennes surrendered as well. Clark made a meeting with some Indian leaders in the west for the Indians to release their prisoners and be neutral in war. The British took Vincennes again, but the British lost Indian support in that area. Late February 1779, Clark launched an attack and retook Vincennes in a bloody fight called the Battle of Vincennes. General George Cornwallis led the British campaign in the south. A slave named Quanimo Dolly showed the redcoats a secret trail to sneak up on the Patriots. On May 12, 1780, the Continental Army surrendered in Charlestown, South Carolina. The British took more than 5,000 prisoners. One of the worst Patriot losses was in Camden, South Carolina in August 1780. Many Patriots fled, and only about 700 of the 4,100 troops survived.
Victory in Yorktown. Patriots were low on money. Benedict Arnold switched to the British side because he was angry at the Continental Congress treatment of him. When British Prime Minister heard of the Yorktown surrounded and said, "It is all over,"